So, for 2 years I worked for a commercial cleaning company. My regular job was cleaning a professional building downtown. You know, one of those office buildings that's all oral surgeons and gynecologists. There were 2 security guards on shift every night. One sat in the lobby, kept an eye on it, and the other one watched the monitors in a room in the basement. I knew one of the regular guys, Doug, pretty well. When he was watching the monitors, he used to watch me on screen. If I was cleaning one of the offices, he'd look it up in the building directory and call. Sometimes to chat, but more often he'd do it to fuck around. Pretend to be a serial killer, or something. It was dumb, but it was a pretty boring job. Anyway, so I'm cleaning this really tacky oral surgeon's reflective black flooring, fake gold laid in the walls, and that really lame fake marble paint effect. I'm wiping down the chairs in the waiting area, when all of a sudden one of the phones starts to ring. I pick it up, and there's a lot of heavy breathing. Panting, almost, and this sort of slurping sound like someone sucking through their teeth. So I assume it's Doug thinking he's being funny. I hang up. But when I go down to the lobby on my way out, he's on his way in. He wasn't working that shift. I guess it could have been one of the guys who was on, but I've always assumed it was someone calling from outside. Probably just a prank call though. That's not really the end of it. See, a few months later I'm down in the basement with Doug, watching the monitors and smoking. They cycle through different cameras on different floors, only holding for a few seconds on each. So one of the monitors switches to a camera in that same office, and I swear to God, a cabinet opens, and someone small, maybe a kid or a midget, climbs out and walks in the direction of the door. Doug tells me to wait down there while he goes up to look. So he heads out, and I immediately lock the door. He doesn't come back down until almost the end of his shift, and refuses to tell me what happened other than to say that it's dealt with. Kind of like mine. B8 and home by myself. Grandma is out on a date. Watching Pokemon in the living room. Hear a tapping on the window. Look through the window and see a man. Back the fuck up. He breaks the window. I drop my Pokemon cards I was holding and nope the fuck out. Run as fast as I can to my great-grandpa's house 4 houses down from ours. Tell him what happened. He calls the police and we go back. The man is gone. Police find something among all the cards I dropped. Hand it to my great-grandpa. He begins to tear up a bit and hugs me. Grandma finally comes home and we tell her. Great-grandpa show her what the police found. She turns pale and hugs me tightly. The next day she replaced the window and has them put special latches on them and the doors as well. Few years pass and I finally work up the courage to ask what they found. Grandma shows me. It's a picture from the inside of my closet at night. You can see me sleeping in the photo. The date is from 2 days before he broke the window. Here's a story that I've never shared before. It's not really paranormal, but it scares the living shit out of me. 17 years old, been smoking weed regularly with a couple of guys from college. I'm from the UK, we start college at 16, for a year now. One of the guys usually drives and we smoke up in this field that's deserted at night. Driver gets a call from someone. He starts freaking out, literally laying on the floor screaming down the phone. Never heard screaming like that before, it was fucking terrifying. He's not even making sense, he's like writhing around on the floor and screaming down the phone. Starts doing this weird fucking laughing, all bug-eyed and weird. Calmly puts his phone in his pocket. Climbs very tall fence for a tennis court. Jumps off, lands on his neck and fucking kills himself. Guy I hung around with every day for a year just ups and kills himself because of a phone call and none of us know who it was on the other end. I wish I was making this up, but it fucked me up for a while afterwards. The other guy we were with started using ketamine regularly. We're both 21 now and he's completely screwed in the head. I was on medication for a while afterwards, shitty citalopram, but came off it quickly. The police put it down to a stoned idiot climbing the fence. They interviewed us both once and that was it. I never even heard from his family, they moved out of the county pretty quickly. I still have his younger brother on Facebook. I've buried the memory somewhere in my brain and just try to ignore it, but whenever my phone rings and I don't have the number saved then I always get a horrible feeling and I never answer. I'm not even explaining how fucking weird this guy was acting when he answered his phone, it was horrible. The fucking noises he was making were so fucking disgusting. I can't even try to explain it because it makes me feel physically sick. Little brother is really into astronomy. He's about 7 years old. Likes to look at the stars and watch things. About 3 weeks ago he spent literally the entire night looking at one part of space from his room. Never once moved. Didn't even eat. When he gets up about noon the next day I asked him what he was looking at. I was looking at the screaming stars. What are you talking about, you little brat? There's a place I found where, if you look at it, you can hear screaming. No way. No, prove it to you. Wait until about 11 at night. Telescope hasn't moved since the other night. Look into it. Hear very faint screams. Eventually gets louder. Have to look away. I noped out and told our mom that she should take away his telescope. I'm never going to look at the stars the same way again. This is a true story, so sorry if it's not exciting enough. This is about something me and my brother call the radio man. My grandparents lived down in this big lake community in Florida, and my family would go visit them during breaks. Anyway, my brother and I would always just go out and explore the woods and shit. They always warned us about snakes and alligators and shit, but they knew and trusted all the people who lived there. So one day, we're just clambering through the swamp trees, and we hear someone talking over in through some trees, so we go to investigate. There was a man in a big coat hunched over in a clearing, talking to himself. But he talked funny. His voice kept jumping to different inflections and accents as he talked. When we talked about it later, my brother said it reminded him of when you scan through a bunch of radio stations and only get a few words from each, almost like a big weird sentence. Hence the name, Radio Man. The guy heard us or something, because he turned and looked right at us. And he was all fucked up. The best way I can describe his face is a lizard face that got put through a blender. And he started walking towards us and saying hello 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 in his creepy ass voice. And we just fucking booked it. We were far as fuck from home, so we just ran together for like 5 or 10 minutes and then hid in a big bush that you couldn't see through. But even though we hid, we were excited and scared and were basically yelling to each other like idiots saying shit like what was that? We were only in the bush for like a minute before it happened. The thing started fucking climbing into the bush with us. It wasn't even saying anything, it was just like softly moaning and grunting with the same weird fucking voice. We shit ourselves and started screaming and both just shot out of the bush and literally ran as fast as we could all the way back home. Our grandparents and parents to this day they think we're full of shit. Looking back on it, it was probably some sort of deformed retarded guy who didn't know any better. My brother suggested once that maybe it was a guy who got shot in the face and it fucked up his brain, which would make sense. But who fucking knows, right? It was still fucking horrifying. We never went adventuring in those woods ever again. I still wouldn't. Fuck that shit. Used to live in a busy apartment complex in Sao Paulo. It's not like American apartments, it's literally 40 stories, with each floor having about 25 apartments. Mostly college-aged people or young adults with family. I go to work after school on Fridays so I come home really late, around 1 a.m. every Friday. I live on the 11th floor so I ring the elevator. The elevator comes eventually makes its way down and the door opens, I walk in. The elevator traffic is usually busy at night anyway so I didn't mind the man who was in the elevator dressed to conceal himself. He had donned a ski mask and had black gloves. It's just him and I. As we are going up I notice he has a knife in his hand that is dripping what looks like blood. There's a small puddle by his side. I ignore this out of fear and quickly exit the elevator once my floor was reached and quickly go into my place and lock the door. The news reveals a murder occurred that day. I didn't directly go to the police as investigations are inconvenient in Brazil, and I can't miss work days. A police officer comes and knocks on my door the following Tuesday and asks if I've seen anything to help the investigation. I tell him no, I didn't see anything. He thanks me for my time and takes off. A week later they televise the suspect has been caught. It's the police officer. I have a story that my father told me. It happened to him when I was a high schooler. Be my father. Live in 2-story house. Bedrooms are upstairs, living room, kitchen, and computer room are downstairs. Nice neighborhood, but had some unexplained thefts, nothing serious. Sleeping peacefully, when something wakes you up. Look at clock, it's 3 a.m. Suddenly, stairs creak. Wooden stairs, they creak underweight. Hear it again, just a second, like someone walks step by step or something low weight. Dogs and cats are definitely outside. At this point eyes are open and listening. See a flash of light coming from the stairs, doors have glass parts. Hear the creaking again, then one more flash. Finally decides to check it out, can't go back to sleep anyway. Go out of the door, try to reach for the light switch when suddenly a creak. Glance toward stairs in reflex. See something humanoid on all fours, limbs all twisted, one hand grasping a step, holding something in the other. Lock eyes for a second, frozen in fear. When the thing slightly moves, jump back into room. Run around like a madman, looking for anything that can be used as a weapon. Nothing there, picks up a fucking chair. Storms out, ready to pummel even a tank with the chair. Except there is nothing. Mom is up too at this point, check the house as quiet as possible, so the kids won't wake up. Find nothing, even with lights on. Go back to sleep. He told me next day, asked if I heard anything. I said I didn't, and maybe he just had a nightmare, since Mom didn't hear or saw anything. The truth is, I did hear and see everything. You know, I had a curfew at 10 p.m., but my parents went to bed before that, so I played some game and finished at 3 a.m. I used my phone as a light source, only when needed. And went on all fours, because I thought distributing the weight might ease down the creaking. I thought I will die when Dad looked at me, but when he went back, I bolted back to my room and pretended I was asleep. Posted in another thread, think it's better than just a bump but too lazy to make Greentext. I'm headed to bed soon. I got stalked by a pack of dogs once. I was working in a very remote area and would go running after my shift, and first it was just seeing a friendly doggo here and there, but later the friendly dogs were joined by meaner and more wild-looking ones. Then I realized the same dogs would be in roughly the same places each night, and a couple started to run short distances with me then break off. When I started to get spooked and changed my route, they followed. So I started running in the cardio room, a trailer with a couple treadmills, an elliptical, and a rowing machine, and they started hanging around the camp. Spookiest moment was leaving my trailer to piss one night and seeing one of the friendly ones waiting. I made baby talk and tried to let her, but each time I got close she backed away. Then I saw another dog under a trailer the direction she kept backing up in, and ran back to my own trailer. Heard running, clicking nails on the walkways between trailers, and a little scratching outside the door. I pissed in a bottle that night. Word had gotten around and apparently I wasn't the only one they'd been paying attention to. Over the next week plus vector control poisoned / shot a bunch of them and they dispersed. Pretty fucking spooky in my opinion. This isn't me, but my brother who still lives in a very rural area. He's a cop, his wife does day trading and trains German shepherds as working dogs, and their house is in some deep country. State land on one side, horse / alpaca farm and more state land on the other. Bro gets home late one night and cracks open a beer. Dogs are agitated, wife hears mooing, asks if he hears it too. Beyond the light of the porch the property goes back 100 meters or so with his tool shed / barn between the house and line where the state land starts. Bro hears mooing too, takes cowboy revolver because John Wayne and starts walking, thinking it must be a neighbor's cow stuck somehow. Keeps walking, out of light, realizes no flashlight but whatever. Moose seem to be retreating into woods. Bro continues. About 350 to 400 meters in there's a creek, dogs love swimming in it. Bro reaches creek and stops. Realizes he's half a kilometer into the woods, at night, with no light. And 5 bullets. Realizes the mooing has stopped. Only sound is running water. Then a soft voice across the creek. Over here. Nope. Start stepping back. Over here. Stepping back intensifies. Continues to tactically get the fuck out until light from porch silhouettes his shed. Wife's voice softly calls. Anon. Freeze.png. Anon. Bro calls out to wife. Crickets. Over here. Bolts the rest of the way to the porch, into the light where wife is standing with two sheppies and bros American Akita, a well-known killer of coyotes, raccoons, stray chickens, and cats in the area. Asks wife if she called him. No Anon, did you find the cow? I always make fun of him for carrying his stupid cowboy revolvers. Now he carries his Beretta, and does not go fucking off in the woods after ghost livestock and rugaruos and shit without light and a loyal companion. Parents die in a car wreck. A week or so later. I'm laying in bed. Crying myself to sleep as usual. Hear a creak on the floor outside my room, and giggling. My dog perks up and starts growling like crazy. My mom slowly leans around the corner of the door. She looks different, and her movements are all wrong. Jerky and twitchy. Go to sleep Anon. It'll all be better soon. It's her voice but sounds clotted somehow. My blood is ice water. My dog is whimpering and cowering now. Mom jerks back around the door. Another creak. My dad leans around the corner. It's okay son, we're gonna be a family again soon. Just fall asleep and giggles. Like my mom. His movements are all spastic and tucked up. His face is a grinning rictus. He jerks his head back out of sight. My heart is pounding. Quickly and quietly as I can. I grab my phone and dial 911 to report a home invasion at my address. I can hear movement and that insane giggling from the hallway. I'm laying there with tears rolling down my face from fear. I don't know how long it was until I saw flashing lights outside the house and muffled shouts. Hurried movement in the hallway. Something crashes to the ground. Muffled shouts from downstairs as the cops come through the front door. Thank you God. They search my house and afterward a cop approaches me white as a sheet. Anon. It's hard to tell you this but we found your parents' faces on the ground outside. That was almost 10 years ago. They never found the sick fucks that did it and I still have nightmares. So I don't remember this happening but my mom got drunk on her 50th birthday recently and told me this happened when I was like 4. At the time I was her oldest and I had a younger brother, we'll call him David, who was like maybe 8 months or so. We lived in an old ass house on the outskirt of Baltimore. So since I was young I would sometimes come in to sleep with them. Especially because the door to the attic was inside my bedroom closet. I vaguely do remember being scared of this closet but then again we moved when I was 5 so I don't remember much. One night my mom wakes up to me crying at her bedside. She looks and I am actually crying over my brother's crib looking down at him. My mom asks me what's wrong. He's gonna eat David. What Anon? Supposedly I shushed my mom at this point and whispered. We can't stop him so we need to be quiet mommy. Then she heard a loud ass thumping coming from the ceiling. Supposedly sounded like someone trying to hammer a fucking nail through the ceiling fast as shit. My mom scooped both of us and we slept at my grandmother's house about 10 minutes away. My dad came back from work the next day and went to check out the attic but my mom told me she refused to go up there for anything and I slept in another room until we moved. Liquored up enough here we fucking go. 1991. Was about 10 years old. Poor as dirt and lived out on a farm. By poor as dirt I mean we literally had nothing. No TV, no cameras, and besides a radio, nothing. We lived in a really rural area in the northernmost part of Wisco. No neighbors for more than a few miles. At home alone because my mom and dad needed to go into town to get some supplies. Listening to some shit I can't remember when someone bangs on the door. Strange, since we normally don't get people out here. Go to the door. There's a fucking crack the door. Motherfucker hit it so hard there was a crack in it. Peeked through the crack to ask him what was going on. He was naked and covered in blood. Pig related. Ask him what the fuck he was doing on our doorstep. I got in a car accident, can you let me in to call someone to pick me up? Dude's tone was flat, kinda like how a computer sounds when it speaks. Tell him to get the fuck out before I go all mafia on his ass. He smiles and says that I won't regret it if I let him in. Get freaked the fuck out and run upstairs to get my dad's shotgun. Was a small kid back then, so it was heavy to hold and almost knocked me flat when I first shot it. Motherfucker was reaching through the crack to try and get in. Shoot his ass. I knew I hit him, because he pulled the fuck back and started running. Looked out of the crack and got ready to shoot him again when I see him running into the woods. On 4 fucking legs. Not how a person walks/crawls on 4 legs. This dude was like a fucking bear or something by how he ran. Too scared to shoot him again. Parents come home to me crying in the corner with the gun next to me. Dad freaks the fuck out when I tell him what happened. He said he can have some of the ice cream he got for me while he went out and tried to look for the dude. Came back the next day and immediately called my uncle who lived in Milwaukee to come and pick me up. The night before my uncle picked me up, I was doing my chores and checking on the cows. The same dude was in the barn, eating one of the stillborn calves. Nope. Go back to the house and tell my dad that some guy was helping himself to a burger in our barn. Goes out there with the gun and threatens to skin the dude if he comes back. The guy just laughs and walks off into the woods. Never came back. I live near a pretty big shopping mall. Right outside it is a massive park and many acres of forest which are dotted with lakes and such that are all connected. There was this one pond which was close to the play parks. This pond was fucking massive and they used to let you hire paddle boats until they kept getting sunk. 2 stories for you. First. Be about 7 or 8 years old. Grandparents are playing with me at the play park while my parents do the shopping. I make friends with this boy, can't remember his name so let's call him L. Me and L are on this badass spider web that's around 50 feet high. We're both pansies so we don't ever go above 10 feet. L had a brother who was about 6 but he climbed to the motherfucking top. Shouts to L and tells him there's a monster in the lake. L tells him monsters don't exist despite his brother insisting that he saw one in the lake. L's brother says it's watching a little boy. Me and L are like whatever and we go on the swings. When my parents finish shopping and are walking me home they see police by the lakeside. Divers and shit searched for him too. Never found anything. Second. Be on same lake about 2 years later. On one of the hired paddle boats. Paddling along with my mother and my uncle when we suddenly can't move anymore. Paddle boat makes god awful scraping sound and refused to move. Uncle thought we got caught on some weeds so he sticks his hand in and moves it around. He turns as white as a sheep and tells us to get away from the sides of the boat. We oblige. 10 or 15 minutes later there's a couple big waves right under us, something shoots through the water and nearly capsizes little boat. Uncle rows us back like a fucking Viking. The tour boat guys asked us if we were okay. We said yes. Just got a little stuck on something. They refunded us our money and told us not to tell anyone. Has anyone else experienced glitches in reality? I think I either experienced one or I'm going insane. Working on spare computer because of bored. Needed an extra screw. Went into spare room to get one. The spare room is an old bedroom that nobody uses anymore so it just became the catch-all for junk/spare electrical parts/etc. Instead of the usually aspiring fire hazard the room was totally empty. Like the walls, doors, windows, switches, and outlets were all there but nothing else. Confused, I just backed out of the room and I think. Shut the door. Pretty sure I blacked out or blocked out whatever happened next because the next thing I remember I'm just washing my hands in the bathroom. I basically froze up like a sim with a cancelled action before freaking out and checking the spare room again. Everything was still there. Exactly where I left it. No, I wasn't dreaming because the computer I was working on was the same as I left it. Stuff around my house was adjusted/in different conditions than before I blacked out. I didn't pass out I don't think but it was daytime when I opened the door and night when I came to. What do anons? Pick unrelated because I have no idea what image I could post that fits. Let me tell you about the Longmen of Tawakoni, anon. Always visit grandma and parents at least once a month. They live out in Lake Tawakoni in East Texas. Bumfuck middle of nowhere, pastures and lakes. Lakes are filling up real good this year by the way, almost 6 feet above average. Me, brother, his girl go camping because tired of family shit. The equivalent of staking a tent in the middle of a barren ass field because we ain't got no woods out here son. We all get drunk off our ass and pass out. Wake up early with a hangover. It's about 4:30 going off my phone. Leave tent to go take a piss. See man walking across the field. No biggie, probably just a hunter. It stops when it sees me. Gives me this really weird ass wave as if its entire arm was stiff. Wave back. Guy keeps standing there. Waving. Crawl back into tent and wake my brother up. Couldn't have been in the tent more than 10 seconds since all I did was give a boot to his side. Step back outside. This motherfucker cleared 600 yards in 10 seconds. Standing and waving that stiff ass arm. Chill runs down my back. Hair stands up on end. Know from previous experience that this shit ain't good. Tell brother to grab his gun. That woke his ass up. He comes out with his rifle. Tell him to aim it at that thing. Thing stops waving. Tell his girlfriend to get into the truck. Both are still shit-faced and hungover, but oblige. Take the rifle and keep it trained on that thing. Its fucking arms unfold. The reason its arms were so stiff in waving is because it was waving them like a retard with its arms bent up to its shoulder. Motherfucker had like 6-foot long arms. He stopped slouching. Easily 8 feet tall. Going off a distance of 450 yards. The most banshee-like screech I've ever heard mixed with a guttural roar emits from the thing. Its jaw distends to the point that it's where its collarbone should be. Pot shot it. Thing lanks onto all fours and hightails it away from us. We come back to the campsite later that afternoon with our shotgun filled with buckshot and the AR-15. Just in case, of course. Tent is shredded, all our food is gone. Track the garbage towards the swamp line. See a ripped apart muskrat hanging from a tree. We both decided to call it quits and just get the fuck out of there. I can't even properly describe the thing we saw. It looked like a fucking bat human with how disproportionate its arms and legs were. Like fucking seriously, the being unfolded his arms like a praying mantis and each of its fingers were nearly a foot long. My brother thinks it was a chupacabra, but I'm pretty sure it was some kind of skinwalker. This one is an urban legend me and my friends used to listen when we were little. Old woman has fruit garden. She lives by herself, husband died a couple years back, sons are in another city. She lives beside mountain range. She starts calling the police because aliens come down from the mountain and start eating her fruit. Multiple times, every time the police arrives nothing to be found. Fuck it, she's crazy, ignore her. One night, screaming and noises from her backyard. Neighbors get weirded out. Go to her house, go around the house into her garden. There they found the old lady standing. Big stick in hand. Literally trying to kill what is described as a weird combination between a praying mantis the size of a big cat and a rat. Nope.jpg. Everyone gets the fuck out, old woman dragged by force. Police called, then again, nothing to be found, but this time there are multiple witnesses. Spend rest of the night in the front yard to see if they catch anything. Old lady doesn't stop saying I told you and laughing. Be me. Bored at 3 a.m. Friend messages me to go explore an abandoned building once a part of the local paper mill. Say yes because I'm a stupid teenager. Crawl in under a poorly boarded up doorway. Place is full of left behind paper mill stuff and shit from the main building dumped here. Walk around with friend exploring and seeing all the cool shit. Stairs going up to the third floor are too rotted to make an attempt, so we stay grounded. Keep walking around seeing if we can find anything left behind we could steal or sell without suspicion. After about 20 minutes we shine our flashlights up the stairwell. See just more shit that was probably dumped before the place was left. Explore for another 10 minutes. Hear a very loud scream and wet crack from the third floor. Friend and I stare at each other. We fucking bolt and look back after reaching outside. See one of the upper windows is now unblocked. See something shining down at us, pic related. I got hired at the wedding hall, the rest of the plant turned into a few years later and snapped a pic on my first shift. Be driving home from a late shift at work. Moon is out, still a very dark night. Live roughly 30 miles outside of town with my cousin. Driving along the interstate for some of the trip, take my turn and start the last part of the drive. 12 miles of dirt road that leads back into the woods. Only have 2 neighbors who live right next to the road I am on. No one for 12 miles. I am about halfway home when I come around a bend, going maybe 35, and I see some bright object crossing the road. Swerve just enough to avoid hitting it. Have no idea what it was. Was very small. Replay making that turn and seeing the object a couple of times in my head. Get curious, and turn around. Come around the corner and see the object resting on the opposite side of the road, totally still. It's a toy. I get out and approach the toy. The forest is totally dark and totally quiet. Still about 5 miles from home. 7 miles from the main road and nearest neighbor. It is a plastic toy train, just the engine portion of a train. I play with the wheels and wonder how it got out here. Turn the toy over and see a dial. Give it twist. It's a wind-up toy. Remember that this was rolling across the street. I drop the toy and begin to walk backwards to my car. Too scared to turn around. Ass bumps into the door. The door rocks, bumps into something and then settles. Something is blocking the door. Before I can turn around to investigate, hear something year off down the road. Plodding like it's on all fours. Turn and see nothing. Get in my car and haul ass home. Never saw that toy again. My cousin believes me cause he sees weird shit too. So you're with your honey and you're making out. When the phone rings, you answer it and the voice is, "What are you doing with my daughter?" You tell your girl and she say, "My dad is dead." Then who was phone? I work as a ranger in the Black Hills. We sometimes see a large black dog walking around the old ghost towns. Most of them are not really towns, just some foundations that are left. The dog is completely silent, and when you look at it, it just stares back, but if you turn your back on it, it slowly paws its way closer to you. You can see it getting closer out of the corner of your eye, but as soon as you look right back at it, it freezes again. It's huge, easily over 100 pounds and matted. Looks old, like its flesh is not quite tight and strong anymore, you know, like an old dog does, but its muzzle is still jet black. Most of the time we just saw it at night, and your headlamp or truck lights would catch a flash of its eyes. I don't know anyone who has let it get too close, but it always scares the shit out of me. Normally seeing it out of the corner of your eye will alert you, and you can get in the truck and drive away or otherwise find an excuse to get the fuck out. As you drive away it tends to stand in the center of the two-track or road and watch you drive, almost like it is noting your truck or something. A couple people have shot at it, but missed. I used to have this blank theater mask that I put on while standing in front of people's houses in the middle of the night. Never saying or doing anything except trying to get eye contact with the people who were up at that time. Sometimes I got a scared face or startled scream, but mostly I went unnoticed. Carefulness was important, so I only went out at random dates in different neighborhoods. Thing is, this one time a guy actually came out to meet me. I was going to run away, but when he opened the door he just stood there looking me in the eyes. It became a game of chicken, but I didn't budge. He seemed delighted that I strayed and took a step to the side, signaling to me I could come in if I wished. However, I had noticed that he wasn't wearing any form of nightly attires. He was fully clothed, shoes included. The thought hit me that maybe he didn't live there. So I ran, and once I came home I got rid of my mask. I still can't forget what he shouted to me as I ran. "Why are you leaving? Aren't we the same?" Might as well tell my story. I was about 12 or 13. Walking back from shopping center in England with my uncle, around 45 years old at the time. Decide to take a shortcut and walk through the woods. It was a nice bright day, so why the fuck not? We get the feeling that we're being watched and can hear brushes moving. I'm telling him something about this video game while he listens. Something in the bush repeats what I'm saying, but extremely garbled. I'm scared but don't show it. Start closing my eyes when we walk through bits that have bushes on both sides. It says it again but much clearer. My uncle looks annoyed and says, "Kids with nothing better to do." We hear it back perfectly. Like it echoed. It repeats 4 or 5 times. We both think it's kids and decide to fuck with them. Uncle, he was the kinda naughty uncle. He'd let me swear around him, which I wasn't supposed to do at my age, says I'm a queer and I like blokes. The thing repeats it perfectly and says it a few times. We think it's hilarious and we're saying all sorts. We start to smell a rusty smell, a bit like pennies. Wasn't too odd because the lake nearby had run off pollutants. Zero sound at all, birds have stopped, wind stopped, and so have crickets. Something starts to chase us and we get split off from one another. I can hear Uncle shouting my name, so I start walking towards it. He's in a field clearing, looking around for me. Go towards him. Glance back because I was always a paranoid boy. See Uncle behind me. A non-stop. I'm really hungry. Look forward and see Uncle again looking for me. Look back, see a really stiff version of my uncle without much facial expression. Bolt straight off to the clearing and we both ran home. It fits the type of story that's usually posted here about skinwalkers. I have other uncles with experiences but they refuse to talk about it. After going to Karlsbad, all I can imagine is getting lost down there, wandering aimlessly through the hundreds of still unmapped tunnels trying to go in a generally upward direction, and vainly attempting to conserve your flashlight's battery as much as possible while still avoiding falling into a deep pit. Standing in the middle of a colossal underground chamber, straining your eyes in every direction for a glimpse of light, but only soaking in what is likely to be your grave. Oh, you'll call for help, sure, and sound can echo a fair bit through those tunnels, but amid the miles of labyrinthine passages it's unlikely another caver would hear you, or find you if he or she did. Maybe in your desperation you'll hope you will stumble upon some strange benevolent cave creature to lead you to the surface. Or find a passage to some form of inner earth. Slowly it will dawn on you, however, that it seems much more likely if a cave creature larger than blind crickets existed down there, it would be the one doing the finding, not you. Yes, in your delirium you'll realize that for many hours now you have been followed, watched, stalked even. And as your flashlight slowly dims you'll grow fearful. Afraid to look anywhere but straight ahead, for fear of what may or may not be lurking in the inky blackness. Finally your light will go out, and you'll be forced to sit and wait for the end or blindly crawl through the tunnels a few hundred more feet before giving up. Naturally your occipital lobe won't know what to do in absolute darkness, miles under the earth, and will trick you into thinking you can see the dark outline of your hand as you wave it in front of your face. That's when I imagine you'll finally hear the first noise in hours that you didn't make. There's an old Indian tale, dating back to 1850 CE, Common Era. It is said that if on the first full moon of the year, you walk down the beach alone and at exactly midnight you chant Old Grey Whale, small and frail, the sand will turn into a whirlpool, dragging you down and down, until you reach a cavern of water. In the cavern is only one thing, a scroll. On the scroll is written a riddle. If the person answers the riddle correctly he will be rewarded greatly. He will have good luck and fortune sprayed upon him and his family for as long as he lives. But if they answer the riddle incorrectly, in front of them will appear a whale, gray in color, it's not very big, and looks a bit frail. But don't underestimate him, because within seconds he will swallow you whole. Many people try, each year to answer the riddle. No one knows what it is, because no one has came back, except one person. The day he came back he won the lottery, $15.6 million. Lucky bastard. The next day he died of alcohol poisoning. The following day his wife was brutally slashed, his children mutilated. The only marks visible are what looks like whale teeth. From the size of the marks, it looks to be a small whale, probably old, and fragile. Fin. About 6 months ago I was in the Sierra Nevada, Golden Trout Wilderness. I wandered off of the trail I was on and hiked up a small ridge. I was at around 10,000 feet, and ancient foxtail pines surrounded me. They were all gnarled and sort of eerie to begin with, and I realized I was surrounded by a small grove of about 6 of them, all arranged in a circle. I think the fact that these trees were almost likely around 8 to 1400 years old has something to do with what happened next. I took the gum out of my mouth and stuck it onto one of the trees. I was under the impression that one day someone would walk by, see it and think, haha, that's funny, I guess someone else was here. Suddenly I felt terror, pure terror. A massive booming sound started filling the air around me. I couldn't understand what the hell was going on, but I swear I could feel vibration in my body from this sound. It was almost like the trees were angry at me. I was actually carrying a gun in the pocket of my down vest. But I didn't feel safe. I fucking ran. I ran as fast as I could, and the quicker I ran the quieter the sound got, but probably around halfway down the ridge I could still hear it. It was faint, but still there. This noise didn't fade in, it abruptly erupted out of nowhere. I have never felt fear like that before, but the next time I head out there I'm going back. I don't think I'll find those same trees. But I'll definitely find tons more of them. Ah shit, I love telling this story. Working in far northern Atlanta. Area where it's literally a huge ass forest and only signs of civilization is oil/gas wells and plants. It's all muskeg in forest area. Muskeg is scary just by itself. It's literally soft ground from decaying stuff in the forest that has grass growing on top. It can be immensely deep water/rotting plants and animals but thick enough to grow and some small trees to even take root. It's Alberta's quicksand. Moose are known to venture into it and get stuck and drown. In areas like this, some of Tay wells can only be visited by most vehicles in winter. Some are even more remote and can only be accessed by helicopter even in winter. I picked up a pretty sweet job on one of the helicopter runs doing maintenance for 2 years. I want to stress these locations are at least 300 to 400 kilometers away from any real civilization at this point, and traveling in these areas is dangerous not only because of animals. One summer my pilot lands us down. As we land, a guy exits the little shack set up on site. He looks pretty normal. Little tattered and rough, but looks like a normal human. Fairly straight cut short black hair. Bit of a 5 o'clock shadow. Iron Maiden t-shirt that is way too large. Regular blue jeans. He's going towards the tree line. Yell out to him something like, "Hey, what are you doing here? We can help you get home." He keeps going. Yell out again, "What the fuck, man? How did you get here? We can help you." Pilot even yells out something like, "We can cancel our run and get you to safety." He makes it to the tree line while we are yelling. He stops. Looks back kind of. His face kind of slips into a smile. He then runs into the trees and disappeared. No one at work believed us. Still stuck with me. Not really paranormal, but truly the weirdest thing I have ever experienced. I just want to know what he was doing out there. Everything in the shack was normal. On my daughter's birthday, I got her a set of pastels and a notebook, among other various toys. She loved them and immediately went about scribbling some drawings in the notepad. Like any proud parent, I put a few on them up on the refrigerator. She drew things like the family cat, our house, her grandmother, my mother-in-law, and the goldfish, his name is Fishy. However, she started to draw some rather grim-looking pictures, featuring a purple-clad white or whatever she is. Apparently her name is Barbara. Neither I, nor my wife know anybody named Barbara. I asked who she was and she told me. She's the lady that watched me sleep. I was dumbfounded. I asked her, "What do you mean she watched you sleep?" She replied, "Yes, she sits near my bed every night and watches me until I fall asleep." This got me very concerned, not only for the safety of my daughter, but for the well-being of my wife and other child as well. I have a newborn. That same day, I went out to the local hardware store and purchased security camera equipment. I installed it all around the perimeter of the house and put 2 cameras facing my daughter's room window. At this point, I thought it might be one of the local vagrants peeping in at my daughter. Since I don't live in the best neighborhood, this was entirely a possibility. We do have a few crazies that stay under the bridge nearby and take drugs. The next day, I asked my doctor if she saw Barbara that night. When she told me that she did, I went right to the security camera and reviewed the footage. I saw nothing. I had to be sure, so I went over it again, this time slower, still nothing. It was then that I decided to set up security cameras inside her room. I didn't tell her about it, then I waited. The next morning, sure enough, she told me she had seen Barbara again. Upon viewing the footage, I saw nothing unusual. You cannot imagine the feeling of relief that swept over my body. I felt as if everything was going to be alright, and I can put this whole Barbara mess out of my head. That was, until my daughter came up to me. What she told me shook me down to my very core. She told me that Barbara was angry at me. She said that Barbara doesn't like being watched. She said that Barbara is going to hurt me if I don't stop watching her. These are the pictures of Barbara. Posted this one in a creepy thread ages ago. Story is from an ex-military guy I know from the pub. Pilot flying up in the Northern Territory. Radio into the airstrip, he knows the couple that run it. Says he'll be there in 4 hours, will radio when he's near the airstrip. Gets close to airstrip, radios the couple in. No reply. Circles and tries again, still no reply. Goes to airstrip in the next town over. Tells the lads working there the couple never picked up their radio. They call the police. Police come around to them, they all travel to the airstrip the couple own. Get there about 2 or 3 a.m. The lights in the house are off, but the spotlights are on somewhere shining off into the hill. They walk around the side of the house where the dogs are kept. 2 things they notice right away. The dogs are dead, but there was no sign of physical harm on them. They all had looks of terror on their face. It appears they were literally scared to death. Second thing was the side of the house was riddled with bullet holes, but they were fired from the inside out. They go into the house to find the couple dead on the ground with the man's AR-15 in his hand. They had a look of fear and shock on their faces, same as the dogs, and they were said to have died the same way as the dogs. Police radio it in. At dawn most the other police and paramedics get there, and so do some lads from the Air Force. They saw them talking to the police, then came over to the locals and told them to fuck off out of here and don't tell anyone what they saw or may have heard. The guy who told the lad from the pub I go to was in the US Air Force and was involved with Project Blue Book and other UFO related business. He told him strange lights and other strange events had went down in the area the night of the incident. B25. Living alone in a kinda shitty house in a bad neighborhood because can't afford anything better and won't live with roommates. Wake up close to 4 a.m. Hear a woman screaming outside. Look out window, see nothing. Screaming quiets, hear the faint sound of wood scraping across pavement. Think maybe some girl is getting raped out there. Grab a golf club I keep in my room for protection and a flashlight. Go outside. Anybody out here? Walk around backyard. See nothing. Still hear faint noise of wood scraping. Walk back to front yard. See something in the shadows near my neighbor's patio. Shine my light on it. WTF. It's a nude black woman's torso with freakishly long arms facing away from me. Long dirty hair. About 4 feet tall. Look down. Her lower body is some kind of flat-bottomed wooden thing, like she has a boat for legs. She turns her head toward me. Her eyes are empty sockets, she has no nose. Run the fuck back inside. Hear her scream at me, ear rapingly shrill. Call the cops, tell them there's a crazy woman outside my neighbor's house, leave out the part about her having a boat thing for legs. Dispatcher man tells me cops will be there to investigate, they never show up because bad part of town and they have better things to do. Stay up all night with golf club in hand wishing I owned a gun. Hear wooden scraping for about an hour later. Stops close to dawn. Ask neighbor about it next day, he gets really anxious and sweaty, denies knowing what I'm talking about. Them was no fucking way he didn't see it. I think maybe he saw it too but was so freaked out he doesn't want to believe it. In 2009, an amateur video artist studying in the UK uploaded a video onto YouTube and other sites of a recent piece he did. After many reports and complaints, the video was removed from many sites. The piece allegedly begins with a shot of a foggy green field, some saying located in Ireland. Only sound that can be heard is a light hissing and some muffled speaking. The camera slowly starts zooming in on a white spot in the shot. After several tedious minutes, people describe a scene of involving an albino deer. A close-up shot of her eyes suddenly appear to viewers, showing some sort of infection or sign of blindness with them. The following shot then shows the deer staring at a vanity mirror for about a minute. After this, things start to become stranger. The deer in the reflection starts moving in dissonance with the real one. Zooming in, the camera focuses on the deer in the reflection, showing it move about it in a frightening manner. People have often described the movements as unnatural and physically grotesque, as though someone was molding her like a piece of clay. As these frightening movements continue, a shot of the real deer is shown again. This time however, she's laying on the ground, strangely at peace. The shot goes on for approximately 2 minutes, still showing the grotesque gestures of the reflection which is slowly starting to darken. The deer laying down then starts to excrete a black fluid from under her tail, suggesting a birth to occur. The tar-like substance continues to seep out from her, onto the ground. After this point, many people stop to report the video. Some accounts vary, but many describe a scene where a stillborn human child comes out of the lying deer, covered in something like tar. Some have claimed it's some made-up hybrid between human and animal the artist sewed together or did in post-production. After a close-up of the hybrid's face is shown, the mirror is shown to be broken, within an empty field. Black and white stock footage of a crowd applauding is shown in slow motion, and then the film ends with about 5 minutes of blackness and mumble/murmurs slowly fading in volume. Many people say the video can no longer be found online, whilst others say that the audio goes around file-sharing programs like SoulSeek and BitTorrent. Some even say they have attained the video itself through such means. Screenshots of it unknowingly pop up on image boards and sites such as Tumblr, but the video itself has been hardly seen outside of its initial debut. A year later, the artist posted another YouTube video, but this time it was just 5 minutes of a black screen and silence. However, the description contained a link to a webcam site. Viewers describe only seeing a couple of dangling, pale feet slightly rotating above a knocked-over chair. This one's gonna kinda be based off of something that happened to me a week ago. Here goes. Hey, is there a full moon tonight? I can't see it out of my side of the car, my roommate asked, half glancing at me before looking back to the road. We were going out of state to visit our respective families for the holidays, and we'd been driving for hours already. I peered out my window and looked around for a moment before I noticed something. Dude, I can see a planet. I leaned forward in the car and craned my neck up at the sky to see better. There among the stars was indeed a solid white dot, never twinkling or blinking. Nice and consistent. As I admired the sight, a moving dot caught my eye. Plane, I thought, watching it. Half a second later, I realized that it looked exactly like the planet I had spotted, white and unblinking. What is that? I wriggled out of my seatbelt and watched it soar across the sky at a leisurely pace. What's what? Looks like a plane, but it's not blinking or anything. Hey, wait! As my eyes traced its path, it faded to a dim orange and then vanished altogether, as though it had gone in a more vertical direction. What did I just see? I searched the sky for another glimpse, but it had vanished. You sure it wasn't a planer? My roommate asked, looking uncertain. I don't think it was, no. I looked around once more, and mere seconds later, I counted 16 planes in the sky, each with blinking lights and multiple colors. There are a couple of weird stories my family insists are true. One similar to OP's is that my great uncle was a witch who could turn into a crow. A more interesting one is that one night when my grandfather was a teenager, he was riding home from town. This is rural New Mexico, and his family owned a ranch, so this was normal. Anyway, as he was riding, he heard a baby crying. He got off his horse and started searching for it. A little of the trail, in some brush, he found a baby. Worried, he took the baby and headed home. It would be taken care of. As he was riding, he started hearing what sounded like a grown man laughing. He looked down and realized it was the baby. It looked at him and smiled, revealing a mouth of full-grown teeth. Screaming, he threw the baby aside and galloped his horse home. There are no fish in Mirror Lake. They all died and washed up on its shores. The people in town won't believe me, but I saw them flood the beach. Their bodies were rounded up and eaten by the creatures in the woods. The few bones that were left were buried in the sand, but no one will come see them. The fishermen lost interest in the lake long ago. No one comes to Mirror Lake anymore except for us lonely few who live on its edge. The others that live on its shore say that the fish are still alive. But I know the truth. There are no fish in Mirror Lake. There is no life in Mirror Lake. Every ounce of living flesh tried to escape, the fish and the toads, the bottom dwellers, and the reptilian. Everything that once tried to survive in Mirror Lake has failed. Now all that stays is the cold dead plants and the rotting bodies of the deceased. If you speak to the others around the lake, they will tell you that the lake is filled with life. They say that the fish and toads are all around, that the bottom dwellers and reptilians are only hiding. But I know the truth. There is no life in Mirror Lake. There are no waves on Mirror Lake. Its water stays still through violent wind and pouring rain. A pebble can stir no ripples on its surface. A boulder would only sink calmly into its murky depths. The people believe that its surface moves, the others on its edge say it moves as much as ever. But I have watched the water, and I know the truth. There are no waves on Mirror Lake. There are no reflections on Mirror Lake. There is only the opaque pitch on its surface. Your image will not show on Mirror Lake if you look from above. The many trees and few houses are not displayed on its still water. The people in the town do not dare look at the murky water in Mirror Lake, and the others that live on its edge say that they see the reflections on its surface fine. But I have stared into Mirror Lake for hours, and I know the truth. There are no reflections on Mirror Lake. Mirror Lake is dead. Its water is deep and unmoving. Its life has all dried up. There is nothing left in Mirror Lake, but I still do not dare look out my window at it at night, for I might see something that stirs its water. I do not wish to see the thing that moves in Mirror Lake, because I know, there are no fish in Mirror Lake. The first few nights, I woke up in a cold sweat, unsure of what plagued my dreams. I remembered only the impression of something restraining me. After a week, the dim light from the city would illuminate my room just enough for me to make out a dissipating cloud. It seemed as if something would puff out of existence the second I woke up. The cold sweat persisted. During that same time I developed problems with my ankles. Simply walking would make the joint feel stretched, like I'd spent all night standing tiptoe. My doctor gave me a muscle relaxant, thinking it was a muscle spasm. They didn't seem to do the trick and the tension only got worse. The nightmares continued. Every night I would spring out of sleep, suddenly awake, and the cloud soon only formed at the foot of my bed. It took longer to dissipate in the third week, the nebulous form of something hunched over slowly leaking out of focus. The image also transitioned over that week from a shadow to a white sort of steam. The pain in my ankles began to intensify in those final weeks. When I could get to the doctor, he couldn't identify any real problem. It just seemed that I slept with my feet tensed. I even underwent a lab test, but for once I didn't experience the nightmare or the waking visions. The doctor sent me home with more medicine and recommended rest for a few days. At home I took the medications and slipped off into sleep, hopeful that the condition had finally ended. I suppose the medications kept me sleeping longer than usual because I awoke to a hoarse braying and intense pressure on my lower legs. My eyes sprung open and I sat bolt upright as I came face to face with the pale, hairless thing which hunched at the bottom of my bed, sitting on my feet and watching me with its head cocked curiously. As I opened my mouth to scream, it slowly began to waver and dissipate into the morning gloom. Slowly. Okay, this is an old dream, but I'll try to recall it as well as I can. I had this one a couple of summers back. Anyone know what it means? It started with me just walking out of my house and a kid from my school at the time running at me, murderously. So I ran to the side of the house and climbed to the roof. On top of it, there stood this girl from that school, who IRL was the sweetest person you could ever know, who started a fist fight. I could not hit her. 1. I would never hit a woman. 2. My arms were temporarily paralyzed for some reason. So, being unable to defend myself, I was thrown off the roof and landed headfirst into the cement. Blood was coming out, but I was not dead, nor unconscious. The dream wouldn't let me wake up. Fast forward to me running from those two, down my street. There were no cars and no other people. After going down a few blocks, I found myself in a portion of a theme park a few hours away. I was standing on a wooden bridge, hanging over the water. Suddenly, all of my friends from the school were closing in on me, zombie-like. I was cornered. Then, another girl came out of the crowd, and ran at me. She pushed me over the wooden barrier and off the bridge. I landed, back first, onto a big rock in the middle of the water, and more blood came out. Somehow, I was still alive and floating and was drifting back towards land. Once I hit land, I looked up to see my friends all crowding around me, like you see in all those horror movies, while I remained on the ground. They all reached out for me and I woke up with a bad headache and a bad back. Remember that I had this dream years ago during the summer right before freshman year of high school, so these were middle school friends. The bridge and the water from the part of the park in the story, but the ship wasn't there from what I remember in the dream. Thought/X? This one seems like an alien story at first, but it isn't your standard UFO encounter. Location, near Cao Bang, North Vietnam, at the time, date, August 12 to 13, 1968. A group of Soviet engineers were working in this region hoping to build a hydroelectric power plant, when they heard a rumbling of engines overhead. They all ran out of their tents and were surprised to see a black, diamond-shaped object hovering in the sky, emitting a greenish-blue light. Moments later, the diamond-shaped object was struck by a fiery object that seemed to come from out of the earth. There was a bright flash, followed by a powerful shockwave that knocked the Russians down, tore their tents apart, and swept away their equipment. Somehow, no one was seriously hurt, but the explosion deeply troubled everyone. For several hours, all the radio and communication equipment was down, and they had to wait until morning to report the incident to their superiors. They promised to prepare a full report on the incident. 2 days later, the scientists found a black sphere-shaped object, about 3 meters in diameter, a short distance from camp. The surface of the sphere was completely black, and reflected no light. Even stranger, the sphere did not cast a shadow. The rays of the sun seemed to go around and right through the object, falling on the high grass all around it. The scientists also noticed that the sphere was cool and slippery, as if doused with soapy water. One of the men attempted to scratch the surface of the sphere with a sharp knife to no avail. They notified their superiors about their strange finding, and soon afterwards, the the group received instructions to set up a protective perimeter around the object and to guard it until a special group arrived. They were strictly warned not to get within 20 meters of the sphere, so the entire group, 5 men total, camped exactly 20 meters away from the sphere. They had no idea what the sphere could be and guessed it was some kind of new weaponry. After building a small bonfire, the men sat down to rest. One of the specialists, Boris Lvanov, wrote in his diary that the men rested uneasy, staring at the object with their carbines ready, just in case, as they waited for the Special Forces group to eventually show up and take control of the situation. Soon one of the men, Vyacheslav, stood up and walked into the brushwood, which was in the direction of the sphere. The rest barely noticed, thinking he was just walking off to relieve himself. When he didn't return, the men began to nervously call out his name, but there was no response. They searched the area with flashlights but could not find Vyacheslav. Concerned and afraid, the rest of the men eventually gave up and returned to the bonfire. An hour later, another man named Peter silently rose and also walked into the brushwood, in exactly the same direction that Vyacheslav had taken. He seemed to move uncomfortably, rocking back and forth, as if very drowsy. A kind of anxiety suddenly enveloped the rest of the men and they remained sitting by the bonfire, unable or unwilling to intervene. Peter never returned. This time the remaining men did not search for Peter, but simply sat and waited. A feeling of doom filled the men. 2 hours later, Vladimir walked off in the direction of the sphere. It was obvious that he had no control. It was as if something were forcing him away from the bonfire. He also never came back. Now only 2 men remained, Boris and Sergei. Both were frozen with fear, refusing to move in the slightest from their positions. Suddenly, Sergei's face became distorted, he stood up like a marionette and meandered away into the dark, in the direction of the strange sphere. Moments later, Boris began to feel his body losing its terrified stiffness and beginning to move. Terrified, he grabbed his carbine and shot himself on the leg so that he wouldn't walk away to an uncertain fate. As a result of the pain, he passed out. This action possibly saved Boris. He woke up in the morning when the specialists arrived. They found him half conscious by the now extinguished fire. He had lost a lot of blood but was still alive. However, the sphere had disappeared along with his comrades. He was soon thereafter evacuated from the area. But the event left him convinced that the sphere had been responsible for the disappearance of his friends. In 1996 I started law school at a big state school in the southern US, think SEC football. Other than studying, I spent most of my time playing multi-user dungeons over the internet until my school's IT dude cut me off saying I was wasting resources. That was fine with me. For $20 a month I could buy unlimited dial-up from some independent ISP and mud all I wanted. Things were fine until I started getting a lot of dropped connections. Like every 20 minutes my landline would disconnect. I lived in an apartment complex off campus. It was probably 50 to 50 grad students and local rednecks. I called South Central Bell. And they sent a guy out to check my line. He fixed the problem. My phone line had been tapped. Someone in this town where I have never lived and knew no one had tapped my phone to listen to my conversations. Whenever they tried while I was on the internet, it caused enough interference to drop the connection. It bugged the shit out of me, but what could I really do about it? I just put it behind me. Then I left town for the summer and had my mail held at the post office until I came back for year 2. I got back in August, picked up my mail, and had them resume normal mail service to my address. 2 months later I stopped receiving mail completely. It didn't register with me until they cut off my electricity for failure to pay a bill I never received. The lady at the post office said someone had forwarded my mail but wouldn't tell me who or to where. It still puzzles me what the fuck was going on there. Heard rumors about them, but that's all. You reminded me of the scariest thing that's happened to me so far. I guess maybe I've tried so long to forget about it that it just didn't come to mind right away. As someone who spends literally all of their time in the woods, you don't ever want to let yourself get scared of being alone, or out in the middle of nowhere. That's why when you have experiences like this, you tend to just forget about them and move on. This is, to date, the only thing that's ever made me really seriously consider if this job is the right one for me. I don't really like talking about it much, but I'll do the best I can to remember it all. As I recall, This took place right at the end of spring. It was a typical lost child call. A 4-year-old girl had wandered away from her family's campsite, and had been missing for about 2 hours. Her parents were completely despondent, and told us what most parents do: "My kid would never wander away, she's so good about staying close, she's never done anything like this before." We assure the parents that we'll do everything we can to find her, and we spread out in a standard search formation. I was partnered with one of my good buddies, and we were sort of casually holding conversation while we hiked. I know it sounds callous, but you do sort of become desensitized when you've done this long enough. It becomes the norm, and I think to a certain extent you have to learn to desensitize yourself in order to work this job. We search for a good 2 hours, going well beyond where we think she'd be, and we come out of a small valley when something makes us both stop in unison. We freeze and look at each other, and there's almost a sensation like a plane depressurizing. My ears pop, and I have this odd sensation of having dropped about 10 feet. I start to ask my buddy if he felt that, but before I can, we hear the loudest sound I've ever heard in my life. It's almost like a freight train passing directly by us, but it's coming from every direction at once, including above and below us. He screams something to me, but I can't hear him over this deafening roar. Understandably freaked out, we look all around us, trying to find the source of the sound, but neither of us sees anything. Of course, my first thought is a landslide, but we're not near any cliffs, and even if we were, it would have hit us by now. The sound goes on, and we're trying to yell to each other, but even standing close together we can't hear anything but this sound. Then, as suddenly as it starts, it stops, like someone threw a switch and cut it off. We stand there for a second, perfectly still, and slowly the normal sounds of the woods come back. He asks me what the fuck just happened, but I just kind of shrug, and we stand there looking at each other for a minute. We're about halfway back when my buddy stops and shines his light to the right of us, into a really thick deadfall, or group of dead trees. I ask him if he's heard a response, but he just tells me to be quiet a second and listen. I do, and in the distance, I can hear what sounds like a kid crying. We both call the girl's name and listen for any kind of response, but it's just this really faint crying. We head in the direction of this deadfall and go around it, calling her name over and over. As we get closer to the crying, I start getting this weird feeling in my gut, and I tell my buddy that something isn't right. He tells me he feels the same way, but we can't figure out what it is. We stop where we are, and call the girl's name again, and at the same time, we both figure it out: the crying is on a loop. It's the same little hitching sob, then wail, then quiet hiccup, repeated over and over. It's exactly the same every time, and without saying another word, we both take off running. It's the only time I've ever lost my composure like that, but something about it was so incredibly wrong, and neither of us wanted to stay out there anymore. When we got back to the rendezvous, we asked if anyone else had heard anything strange, but no one else knew what we were talking about. I know it sounds sort of anticlimactic, but that call fucked me up for a long time. As for the little girl, we never found a trace of her. We keep an eye out for her, and all the other people who we've never found, but frankly I doubt we'll ever find anything. Be me, 16 years old, circa 2010. Getting home from a friend's house. Enter bathroom, piss, enter bedroom. Throw my backpack on top of my bed like a common messy teenager. The moment the backpack hits the bed, a horrible sound comes from under the bed. Sounded like you would imagine a werewolf would growl. Horrible sound, but not very long, maybe 3 seconds. Have a dog, think that the fag got under my bed or something, but that noise was way too fucking horrible for my dog to make it. Even though I don't believe in this shit, I don't risk it. Call my uncle, whom was in the kitchen. I heard a horrible sound under the bed, called the dog's name but it didn't come out. Watch me as I look under. Feel very uneasy, can feel I'm going to see some abomination and it's going to rip my face off. Nothing but my dumbbells under the bed, feel relieved. To this day I can't explain that. I heard it clear as water, I wasn't high or drunk, later saw that my dog was outside chilling with other dogs nearby. Also, kind of related. Year back when I was like 8 years old. Fresh summer day, chilling in my living room with the door to the yard open. Suddenly random dog appears, didn't have a dog till years later. Literally enters living room, doesn't even look at me and goes straight to my bedroom. Gets under my bed. Don't know what the fuck is happening. Grandma comes because I was making noise by telling the dog to get out. Explain to her what happened. We conclude that the dog was looking for a place to die. I don't believe that. The dog looked healthy and young. When we got it out, he acted like a normal dog being kicked out of a place. When he entered, I'll never forget how he looked like he knew exactly where he was going. Weird shit. Be me. About a year ago. Need to do some general maintenance for my car. Oil change, tire rotation, etc. Too busy and don't feel like doing it myself, so going to take car to shop. Brother, who is the family car guy, is adamant that I take it to a dealership almost 40 minutes up the bypass. Fine, whatever. JPEG. Get to the dealership, have car serviced and get back on bypass to go home. About 6 or 7 miles from dealership, in cluster of cars. Get a weird feeling, feel unsafe. Decide to speed up and get away from this cluster of cars. Not even a minute later, I see something out of the corner of my eye in my rear view. White SUV that I passed is swerving across the lanes. Smoke coming from the back, obviously had a blowout. Other cars behind me start swerving to avoid the SUV, no idea if it hit any of them. Last I see of SUV, it stopped in the median. No idea why I got that feeling something was going to happen. Now make it a point to avoid large clusters of cars when driving on the interstates. Fuck, I've been thinking of this and it reminded me of something eerily similar back when I was a kid. Be me. In 5th grade, so either 10 or 11. Wake up for school. Start typical morning routine of getting ready. While brushing my teeth, get a huge fucking feeling of dread. Wasn't a I don't want to go to school feeling, it was a don't go to school feeling. Concerned, but brush it off. Finish getting ready, eat breakfast, and get in mom's car to go OT school. Dreadful feeling still in the back of my head, but I don't think much of it, probably just general anxiety. As my mom is driving down the road our neighborhood is off of, we come up to an incline with a slight curve to it. Dump truck carrying rocks from a nearby construction site. Coincidentally, the construction site was for an expansion of the bypass my first story takes place on to take it through my town. Me and my mom aren't near the curve, but the dump truck is. I didn't notice this, but my mom said the dump truck was speeding. Right as we're nearing the curve, the dump truck flips on its side after almost doing a 180. Skids across the road towards us. Mom slams the brakes. The smaller rocks the dump truck was hauling come flying towards us, denting the hood of her car and cracking the windshield. Miraculously, both me and my mom were perfectly fine. If we had been even just a few meters closer, the larger rocks the dump truck was hauling would have definitely hit us. Police come, some people living in another neighborhood off that road also come out to see if we need help. They get the dump truck driver out of his truck. Dump truck driver was bred up a bit but also okay. Turns out he was like 15 or so and didn't even have a license. Dad comes home from work to pick us up. Cry like a bitch when we finally get home and play video the rest of the day. Again, have no idea where this feeling came from. There was a hunter in the woods. Who, after a long day hunting, was in the middle of an immense forest. It was getting dark, and having lost his bearings, he decided to head in one direction until he was clear of the increasingly oppressive foliage. After what seemed like hours, he came across a cabin in a small clearing. Realizing how dark it had grown, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. He approached, and found the door ajar. Nobody was inside. The hunter flopped down on the single bed, deciding to explain himself to the owner in the morning. As he looked around, he was surprised to see the walls adorned by many portraits, all painted in incredible detail. Without exception, they appeared to be staring down at him, their features twisted into looks of hatred. Staring back, he grew increasingly uncomfortable. Making a concerted effort to ignore the many hateful faces, he turned to face the wall, and exhausted, he fell into a restless sleep. Face down in an unfamiliar bed, he turned blinking in unexpected sunlight. Looking up, he discovered that the cabin had no portraits. Only windows.
A couple months ago, my friend's cousin, a single mother, had gotten a new cell phone. After a long day of work, she placed her phone down on the counter and started watching TV when her son came to her and asked if he could play with her new phone. She told him to not call anyone or mess with text messages, and he agreed to do so. At around 11:20 p.m. when she was getting tired, she decided to tuck her son in and go to bed herself. She proceeded to his room to see that he wasn't there. She went to her room to find him sleeping on her bed with the phone in his hand. Browsing through her phone, she noticed only minor changes such as a new background, banner, etc., and headed towards the pictures section. She began deleting the pictures he took when she came across the last one. When she first saw it, she couldn't believe it. It was her son, sleeping on her bed, but it was as if the picture was taken by someone else above him. It shows the left half of what seems to be an elderly woman's face. In any city, in any country, go to any mental institution or halfway house and you can get yourself to. When you reach the front desk, ask to visit someone who calls himself the holder of the end. Should a look of childlike fear come over the worker's face, you will then be taken to a cell in the building. It will be in a deep hidden section of the building. All you will hear is the sound of someone talking to themselves echo the halls. It is in a language that you will not understand, but your very soul will feel unspeakable fear. Should the talking stop at any time, stop and quickly say aloud, "I'm just passing through, I wish to talk." If you still hear silence, flee. Leave, do not stop for anything, do not go home, don't stay at an inn, just keep moving, sleep where your body drops. You will know in the morning if you've escaped. If the voice in the hall comes back after you utter those words, continue on. Upon reaching the cell, all you will see is a windowless room with a person in the corner, speaking an unknown language and cradling something. The person will only respond to one question. What happens when they all come together? The person will then stare into your eyes and answer your question in horrifying detail. Many go mad in that very cell. Some disappear soon after the meeting, a few end their lives. But most do the worst thing and look upon the object in the person's hands. You will want to as well. Be warned that if you do, your death will be one of cruelty and unrelenting horror. Your death will be in that room, by that person's hands. That object is one of 2538. They must never come together. Never. I don't come here. But I thought you'd like to know this. I won't bump this. I won't respond. But I need to tell someone. I have a 1.5-year-old nephew. We play all the time, and he's a jolly little kid with a Charlie Brown head and a lot of energy. When he first started talking, he would say things silly, Popeye is Poopeye and seahorse is he's horse, but one thing he would say no one remembered him teaching him. Geppo. We would constantly ask him what he meant. We thought maybe good boy or hippo, but he can say these words on their own. Whenever he says Geppo, he stops in his tracks and stares at something and points and says Geppo. His mother assumed, like we all did, that it's a nonsense word he uses to describe something he doesn't know. I thought that. Until 3 days ago. I was holding him playing a naming game. I will point to something and ask him to name it, fan, light, etc. I pointed to the door and said, "What is that?" He whispered Geppo. I said, "No, that's a do." And then I noticed it. His eyes training to focus on something between the actual door and himself. He then followed the thing with his eyes up around to 8 feet, which would have looked as if he was just scanning the far wall and looking up at the ceiling. But I knew he was not. He gripped me tighter and said Geppo. I took him outside. I'm not sure what to do or what's going on, but I had to tell someone. I'm not even sure I'm spelling it right. He says Geppo like gecko, but he can say gecko. I googled scary for the image. I know you guys like the scary stuff. Good night. I feel a bit better sharing this. Thanks. Life as you know it is a lie. It seems so realistic to you, but all dreams seem realistic when you're dreaming them. But remember that day you fell off your bike? Well, that was more serious than the scrape on your palm and the bruise on your knee. It seems you just continued your life as you normally would, but all of our lives were put on hold that day. And we all spend day after day in your sterile hospital room, watching machines feed you and breathe for you, hoping and praying that you'll wake up. Sometimes we hear you humming unfamiliar tunes, and it gets our hopes up briefly. But the doctor tells us you're only dreaming, and that your brain activity hasn't changed since the day the ambulance brought you here. When you realize you're dreaming, you'll come back to us, I hope. Unless you're happier in your fantasy world. I know you're in there, and I really hope this reaches you somehow. We all miss you so much. Be driving home from a work trip with my coworker Mark. Be late night. Around 11:30 p.m. The road is leading through a forest, no other cars in sight, cloudy sky too so pitch fucking black. Mark. Hey Anon, I need to take a piss. Stop the car. He gets out, walks about 20 meters into the forest, I'm not sure how far since I can't see shit from the car. Hear him trip on some stick or some shit and curse. Laugh at his shy bladder. Next time just take a piss next to the car you retard, didn't really said it out loud though. Mark finishes pissing, walks out of the forest and gets back in the car. Continue driving for 10 minutes. Mark just silently stares out of the window. Suddenly my cell phone rings. Pull out my cell phone and look the display to see the name of the caller. It's Mark. Cold sweat immediately floods my entire body. Every muscle clenched, start shirting myself. Oh god, the thing who got back into the car with me isn't Mark. Put the phone to my ear and accept the call to not look suspicious. For a second consider just jumping out of the fucking car. Remember I have a switchblade in my pocket. Fuck, should I go for it? Hear a voice from the phone. It's Mark's GF, that retard left his phone at home, and so she was calling me to make sure the work trip went okay. Close off the stream of soft stool pouring down my underpants. Mark will never know how close he actually came to have a knife in his neck, because his coworker is apparently mentally damaged retard. One of the scariest things I've ever had happen to me involved the search for a young woman who'd gotten separated from her hiking group. When we found her, she was curled up under a large rotted log. She was missing her shoes and pack, and she was clearly in shock. She didn't have any injury, and we were able to get her to walk with us back to base ops. Along the way, she kept looking behind us and asking us why that big man with black eyes was following us. We couldn't see anyone, so we just wrote it off as some weird symptom of shock. But the closer we got to base, the more agitated this woman got. She kept asking me to tell him to stop making faces at her. At one point she stopped and turned around and started yelling into the forest, saying that she wanted him to leave her alone. She wasn't going to go with him, she said, and she wouldn't give us to him. We finally got her to keep moving, but we started hearing these weird noises coming from all around us. It was almost like coughing, but more rhythmic and deeper. It was almost insect-like. I don't really know how else to describe it. When we were within sight of base ops, the woman turns to me, and her eyes are about white as I can imagine a human could open them. She touches my shoulder and says, "He says to tell you to speed up. He doesn't like looking at the scar on your neck." I have a very small scar on the base of my neck, but it's mostly hidden under my collar, and I have no idea how this woman saw it. Right after she says it, I hear that weird coughing right in my ear, and I just about jumped out of my skin. I hustled her to ops, trying not to show how freaked out I was, but I have to say I was really happy when we left the area that night. About 12 to 13. Lived in a pretty nice house. For some reason at around 10 p.m. every night for a month there was a single knock on my window. After a week just accepted it. Eventually just said out loud, "Can you stop, I'm trying to sleep cunt," when it happened. Stopped a week later. Still don't know why it happened. Whenever I looked out the window no one was there.